My name is Cody. I'm Cody Galley here at Maryland. I hope you all have the opportunity to see our exhibition tonight. It's truly spectacular. If you didn't, we will be open until April 14th and encourage you to come back. Tonight, we welcome Cody exhibiting artist Eassa and independent curator Thomas James to our living on stage. This will be an informal discussion, and we'll have 10 minutes for questions at the end, so please keep those in mind for when the time comes. We'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Robert W. Deutsch Foundation for supporting Dave through a Ruby's Artist Grant. Such patronage can be a game changer for artists and art facilitators alike. I want you all to know that Dave's exhibition, People and Places You Don't Know How to Know, is near and dear to my heart. Dave and I prepared for this exhibition for almost a year before opening in January, and it's been my privilege to witness his growth and the magnitude of his artistic prowess in this exhibition. Even more powerful has been the response of our students here at Marymount, who see themselves represented on our walls by way of Dave's paintings, which depict his own family members who immigrated to the United States from Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon generations ago. In addition to his work as an artist, where he has exhibited at institutions and galleries across the country, Dave founded a program called Free Space, which brings the arts to the Maryland prison system, teaching art to men and women in correctional facilities. He currently is the Director of Public Engagement at the Baltimore Art Museum, working on a range of initiatives that challenge and question what it means to be a museum in present-day Baltimore. In 2018, he was selected as one of the 50 young cultural innovators from across the globe for the WCI Fellowship at the Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria. Over the last year, he has been serving as a Salzburg Global Fellow as part of the recently launched Global Innovations on Youth Violence, Safety, and Justice cross-national collaboration. Next week, Dave will co-host a screen printing workshop with 12 students in a printmaking class here at Marymount, creating t-shirts to benefit Seven Hills and Mount Jordan, where Dave completed a residency last summer that largely informed his current exhibition. It is this confluence of actionable community support, global engagement, and artistic vision that has brought out the best in us at Cody and at the university at large. As it happens, extraordinary people tend to attract extraordinary people. In conversation with Dave tonight is the dynamic independent curator Thomas James, who is a Washington, D.C. born, Prince George's County, Maryland raised curator, currently based in Baltimore. Thomas strives to communicate ideas through exhibitions that focus on storytelling. By approaching his curatorial practice as a narrator, he is able to emphasize the cultural backgrounds and nuances within artists' works. For Thomas, storytelling is imperative to communicating grander concepts that create approachable, intellectual conversations, much like the one we will witness this evening. Prior to his current role, Thomas served as the curator of Creative Alliance and UB Lake Cultural Center. He is now the executive director of the Last Resort Artist Retreat, as well as continuing his curatorial practice and serving on various boards and projects for different sectors of the arts ecosystem. Thomas received his bachelor's degree from Frostburg State University. He has guest curated numerous exhibitions at institutions including the Phillips Collection in Washington and other organizations across the country. Both Dave and Thomas's community-centered ethos dovetails perfectly with Marymount's mission, which makes this particular talk and exhibition so meaningful. The three pillars of Marymount's mission are intellectual curiosity, a global perspective, and service to others. Our speakers tonight embody all three pillars through their dedication to their Baltimore communities, the ecosystems that support artistic creation, and their pursuit of a higher good through that devotion. With that, we are honored to have all of you with us to hold space for this conversation between Dave and Thomas tonight, so please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Are we?
Check.
Yes. Okay.
I think we're good.
Awesome. I'll make sure I can't even say like here exactly. So I want to start this talk by first asking you, because especially after Caitlin will be reading Dave's bio, I didn't even know that you did like all of that. I'm like, oh, I know some of them. I'm like, oh, wow. So can you, the first thing to kind of kick the conversation off is I kind of want to talk about you and what has motivated you to have such a list of accomplishments. Like what is it? You know, especially connecting with the show and talking about your upbringing, your family.
For sure.
Yeah.
Is this working?
Yes.
All right. So I'm Dave Eassa, and I'm an artist and cultural worker. Going on about a good decade of this, whatever this is. And I think for me, and I think a lot of the people I associate with, a lot of people whose work I find attractive, whose energy I'm energized by, I'm attracted to. It's these folks who are working in all of these different ways to make the world a better place, and however small, large, medium way they can do it. And so for me, a lot of times when I speak with classes, when I speak with students, I ask them quite plainly, and some people get a little bummed out, but I ask them, what do you give a shit about? What do you care about? What can you not forget? Like, what can you not live without? Like, what are the things that are going to drive you every day? And for me, my 20s, my teens have been figuring out and exactly honing what my marching orders are, right? And thinking about, what do I do? What do I care about? And how do I want to put that out into this world? And so I grew up as a skate rat, born and raised in Ellicott City, kind of midway between Baltimore and DC. As soon as we could, we were running all over DC and Baltimore, learning about the city in our very own specific way. And what that started doing for us as I was really young is it taught us to look at things from a different perspective. The way I walk down the street is very different from the way that other folks walk down the street, just because of how, I'm always looking, what am I going to skate? How are we going to do this? And that's translated, right? And so as a skateboarder, I grew up with a lot of really interesting folks and a lot of really interesting guys in my life. And we all went in very specific ways, right? We either have taken the beauty of skateboarding, where you fail over and over again until you succeed. You look at things differently, and you have an insatiable appetite for more, and you take that into something positive, or you take that somewhere else. And so for me, I have a crew of folks who have driven my marching orders, and then a crew of folks who we've lost, who have also driven my marching orders. And so as I try to figure out what all this is, or how does this all work, it really just comes down to people, right? That's all I really care about. That's what I'm driven by. So how are we using what I have in my life at my disposal to make the world a little bit of a better place? You know what I mean? So all of those aspects, all of those things that Caitlin might have jumped off with, those are all just ways that I'm working with people. I just rambled a good bit on that. I think
I thought I was getting a good gist.
It's how do I, through skateboarding, through art, through community, through Baltimore, which I think we both have made extreme commitments to at this point, how do I fit into all of these places? Because the way that you and I think through things are really important, not only in an arts ecology, but they're also really important if you're working with the government in Baltimore, if you're working with institutions in Baltimore, with schools in Baltimore, with young people, with all these different things. So for me, long story short, it's all about people, time and time again. That's the only thing that's ever going to matter. Yeah.
What about, so how are you choosing these specific projects and projects that you're involved in, communities that you're involved in? Because when it comes to, for example, you are in the, you do a lot of public art that is seen by the public,
Yeah.
that is acceptable. That I mean, I am to a certain degree, but not, I'm talking like outdoors.
Yeah.
And then, again, in prisons and things like that. So how are you going about choosing these different projects and things that you're involved in?
I mean, basically where it all begins for me is my homie Ron, who you came and got to see all the Ron paintings with. So Ron is like my best friend, my brother, and everything but blood. And we lost him first to heroin, and then we lost him to gun violence much later. And so all of my like 20s into my 30s, all of this work has actually just stemmed from him, right? Skateboarding gave me the tools to be able, it gave me the energy that I brought into my art schooling, into my training there, which then gave me that ability to think in a different way. It gave me a place for all of that energy to go. And then what happened is losing Ron gave me my marching orders. It gave me something that I couldn't look past, that I couldn't forget about. And, you graduate school. I think we've all gone through this moment where you're like, what am I doing? Like, what's going on now? Like, where am I going to take all this? I have a BFA in painting. Like, some people, some people don't feel, when you put that on a job application, there's a certain type of thing.
Right.
Not realizing now, like, the power in that, like, what us artists hold and what we need to have. And, Ron, in my years after school, when I was just gigging everywhere, trying out things, like working here, working for this artist, whatever, Ron would only call me when he was clean, when he was locked up, and he was calling me from Howard County. And what I realized is that, like, art gave me the placeholder for energy, right? It gave me the place where I wanted to put my work. And the thing that I cared most about was people going through what Ron was going through, which is addiction and the cycle of incarceration and all of the things that come with that. Chronic joblessness, in and out. It was really heartbreaking to be a part of that because we all knew him and we all knew what he was capable of. And so that just opened the door to me when I started, I started reaching out to the prison system, MCIJ in particular, in Jessup. And what happened is I was writing proposals and I was cold calling wardens in Maryland. And they were like, who are you? Like, what are you thinking? Why do you want to do this? Like, I wasn't part of a church, a school, anything like that. But what that did is it opened up my world in a huge way and kind of set the stage for all of these different things that have happened, which I'm not going to pass to you because I kind of want to hear also what is your marching orders in thinking about now where the world sits for Thomas James.
That's a great question. I mean, sort of like you in a certain way is kind of just having that calling. And I guess for me, I've always strived to do things differently than how I saw things growing up. Meaning, like, I always enjoyed being creative. I always liked just doing things, doing things that are new and fun and fresh, and then trying to bring in other people to what I'm doing so that we can create something bigger. So I guess the marching orders for me kind of just became like, I saw how art transformed my life, and again, I'm not even like making anything, just feeling important and wanting to be informed and create and be able to give an informed opinion about work.
Yeah,
and things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I tell people this story all the time. The way that I was kind of introduced to the fine art world, not even just because I've been creative, but like the fine art world was I was in college and we got extra credit if we went to the university's openings or whatever. And so like the first one that I went to, I went and a professor asked me, like simply just asked me, what do you think about the piece that was on display? And I was like, oh. Again, then you're like, I'm a freshman. It's like the first couple of weeks of school, and a professor's actually asking me my opinion
Yeah.
about it. I'm like, okay. And then we had a great talk, and I was like, that felt pretty good.
Yeah.
And kind of just like I've always wanted to give those experiences to other people because I know what it's like to just internally feel like my story doesn't matter, my opinion doesn't matter, and that could be demoralizing.
Big
And
time.
so, and so like art was my way of being able to do that, and I know that it may never spawn any, often to anything artful for anybody, but people being able to come into a very a comfortable, hopefully safe space that hopefully you can see something that you might be able to resonate with, and then interact with someone who isn't pretentious or someone who actually might pay you some attention. I know that it can be life changing because it can give you just like that spark of confidence. Like people that I know would have nothing to do with art in general.
Yeah.
Now sometimes tell me like they're not even involved in art, but they're like man, because of you, like I love going to art gallery, I love going to museums, and and again, they're not even super involved in it. They might as well guys go, I like to go there and look.
Yeah.
But again, that's still an important part of the ecosystem and an important part of what art can do, the sort of transformative nature that it can do. And so that being able to replicate that time and time again is definitely like an internal driving force.
What do you think was your like for me, I feel like the working in the prison system for 3 years was like my moment where I was like, wait, we need to be everywhere. Like artists need to be over here. We need to be working with city government. We need to be working all of this. And that spawned all of my experiences now. What was your moment of like, the world has just opened big time?
That's a good question.
Because there's been a lot of different energies across a lot of different spaces.
Yeah. I think when I realized that we make the rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meaning like I was in, I've worked in many different capacities at different institutions and with different organizations and stuff like that. And so for a long time, I thought that it was just important to be in the room because I may have a fresh perspective or whatever. But then when I got to, I may be in a different environment and the rules were either non-existent or not there anymore. I'm like, wait a minute, I can come in and I can make the rules, not like in restrictive ways, but like, protocols and processes and ways that we're, mission driven and things like that. So I think that moment for me was really, I think it was when I was introduced to UB Blake Cultural Center, and not that they didn't have rules, but like I came from a very strict background of this is how we do things in all my different arts training. And when I got to like it was similar as like we do things a certain way, but the rules were a little more we can sort of make it up ourselves. And so I took that and I went back to other organizations. I'm like, we don't have to do things this way.
Yeah.
Like this is not, and especially a place like UB Blake Cultural Center is a hub in Baltimore where people come and feel safe at the end of the day. Like we do a whole bunch of different things, but the most important thing to me is that we are a place where people know that they could come and be accepted and things like that. And the other place that I've been at, they didn't necessarily have that, maybe still don't, but and I didn't realize that one of the reasons that I'm being brought in is because that's something that I bring. I bring an energy and an approachableness, as well as wanting to have high level conversations and showing high level art, blah blah blah. But yeah, it kind of just like seeing that and being like, okay, this is something that's very important. Like we need to be able to be in these rooms and to be able to create the atmosphere that we want to see.
You felt like UB was the place where it really solidified, like, as a curator, I'm not only responsible for what's on the walls, but I'm also responsible for how this space feels, like, how the artists I work with feel, how the community who views this work feel. That was that time?
It was more like it was more like a realization
Yeah,
of this is what I've been doing
yeah,
and not even really knowing it, and I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the importance of it here at U because it's kind of like, hey, you have the keys and you can do what you want, and I'm doing the same thing, but I'm realizing how important the way that I do things is. So now I can take that back to wherever I'm going, and I'm saying, okay, I've seen this work, and this is what we say we want to do. So I guess for me, like in a way, being at UB kind of made me look at accountability differently
yeah,
because at many different organizations, there's a mission and something that we are supposed to strive for, and we may or may not do it, or it may just be on paper. But I actually saw UB doing it in a way that I hadn't necessarily recognized other places, and so I'm like, so when I go back, I could say, okay, wait, so we say that we want to do X, Y, Z, but we're not really doing that. Like, and all the rules that we have that say we're gonna get to this mission or this value or whatever, they're not working. So now I'm a person that I can say, okay, well, I've seen how it works other places, so I'm gonna bring it in here. That was kind of like that moment.
And I feel like art is the way to do that too. It's like the way that it's the common denominator that quickly, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from, what language you're speaking. It's one of the things in this world that actually connects people right off the jump. And so using it in a space like that and being able to like really consider how you're showing up for people and how you're using this really powerful thing, which is arts experiences, is really dope. I think that's been a driver for me too. It's like I care about all of these other things that like affect the quality of life of all these people that I care about. But like art is my stealth mode. Like that's how I connect with people. That's how I go in with people, you know?
So why do you think that why do you consider it important to have artists in not only just in the arts ecosystem, because it's more than just the art making, but the overall ecosystem. So the potentially having artists on the admin side, on the programming side, in the board meetings, in these sort of things. Why do you consider it important to have actual artists in those spaces?
I mean, I think you and I both know this so intimately from, like, we both have day jobs that align with our identities, right? Pretty deeply. Mm-hmm. And then we have practices across the board that sometimes are even deeper in alignment with our identities, sometimes less. And what I think why you and I succeed and thrive in a lot of situations is because we know exactly how people want to be treated and exactly how to work with folks who are coming from our sort of creative worlds. That paired with the simple fact is that art really makes you think, like it makes you question those possibilities outside the boxes. You know, every like really amazing scenario I've ever been a part of, like every moment that like is that sort of like magic that can come up, it's all been because of art. Like anything that happened in the prison system, which is like not necessarily like, you know, that jump in a different world, it's a little tougher. With the art world, it makes perfect sense. It's like we've got a classroom of folks who are incarcerated who may have varying degrees of feelings towards one another, good or bad, and we're coming together into this space to learn together, to grow relationships with one another, and to invest in our own emotional well-being. And art's like the only way you can do that. You know what I mean? So you take that same sort of issue, prompt, situation across the world, anywhere. And it's always going to be art, food, or music that bring people together. You know what I mean? It's the cultural work that actually gets folks talking and in the same room. So I think it's just become so apparent, like the more and more that my work goes beyond just a gallery, like not saying like just a gallery, but like beyond the gallery world, and knowing that I want to create this life that is, there's a lot of artists who have done really amazing things in this realm, but what they do is they use their work to affect change or wherever they are. And they can do that programmatically. Sometimes they get really big, you know what I mean? Mark Bradford able to do that because they have a lot of bread and they are really well connected, and it's just a thing, you know what I mean? We just got to be there. Like I don't know. I don't know. Why do you think?
I mean, to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, I mean, now, there's a really good example. So I was on a panel for a gallery that had an open call, and we were choosing like solo shows, and so on the panel there was a curator who was not an artist, a full-time artist, and then me, who's kind of in the middle. It's like I have a creative practice and I also have an administrative practice, and so throughout the jurying, we each had our list of like the top ones. We go through everybody, and then the ones that stood out the most, we went more in depth about who we think should win the solo exhibition for that year, and then when it came down to the last, it was between two people, and so after that we're like, okay, we can't choose between these two, like we have to dig a little deeper. And so, I'm looking at their CVs, what they have coming up, and where they've been, because the work for both of them was amazing. And there was one artist, and she had a solo show. She had a couple solo shows coming up already, and the other, whose work I think was, I did think that the work was a little more developed than the other artist. Hadn't shown that much, but I thought the work had a lot of potential. And so the curator, she's like, no, this person has the best work. This is the show. And the artist is like, well, we should try to give someone a chance. And in my mind, I had the person who I was going to choose was the person whose work was more developed. But because there was that other person in the room who was really championing the artist with little legs, he was like, no, this is what these sort of arts organizations are here for. And I was like, you know what? You're right.
You're right.
And so I say that to say, to me, that's one of the important parts about having artists in these roles, because they, like you said, we not only do we know how to treat people, which I think is a huge part of it. It's the same reason why there should be. Why a lot of like boards and organizations are now trying to get more diverse in the people who are like different races and genders and sexual identities and things like that into their organization, because it's like if you're not from a certain community, or you identify with a certain community, you may not know different triggers or what they value, or how people like to be treated, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's the same thing with these, and again, not just arts organizations, it could be any organization. Really being able to know, be able to remind people of certain things that, for example, if the mission is to help more like emerging artists or whatever it is, then having someone there to remind you that that's the important thing. Because I think sometimes that can get lost if you're in a room that where people aren't necessarily in the creative realm, so there might be a little less empathy.
Totally. Yeah, and I think, so I wanted to, bring that up because as we kind of shift over into this body of work, it just was so apparent to me in this process of like how important it was. Like a lot of times because we sit in so many different places, like having the support system of a year to work through ideas and what that did with Caitlin and with everybody at Cody brought me to a place that I don't think knew I was able to get to or ready to get to, paired with, the COVID dumpster fire that we all went through. But it was, for me, as I'm thinking about this exhibition, which feels like such a critical juncture in my life and work, I couldn't help but think about like all of the different ways and all of the different factors that came into making this real. And so I always think it's like very important to highlight those of like, we don't do anything in a vacuum. Like we don't do anything really alone either. Everything is like, there's so many factors that go into this, So that was my point to shout out Caitlin, because this has been an amazing process of learning for myself, supported by Cody, by Caitlin, by all of the things here.
What's the opposite of that? Like what are some things that you may have already experienced that where you don't feel supported? Like what does that do to an artist?
I think it just gets kind of tough, I think for us, we got to dream, we got to think, and having trust is really key. I think the sort of, like I feel like being an artist, being an arts worker, being a curator, all these things is about like managing relationships, and like the way that I like to make work and the way that I like to exist in this world is built on a lot of different relationships. Like this show was built on this really new relationship for me, which was going to Amman, going to Seven Hills, and starting to like open that world up, the very confusing egg that is personal identity, and crack it wide open. So I think it's maybe less of like a bad experience, but more of like that feeling of over the last year of how we've gotten to this moment, and that show that we have upstairs that we can see.
So can I kind of want to shift a little bit, because I think it does relate a lot to the show. What was that experience like for you? Not only going back home, but also going with a very specific purpose and mission in mind, which is very different than just
chilling.
Yeah. Just like experiencing things in a certain way. You're going with an actual mission.
I think so. The three of us have talked extensively about this, and I think a lot of the board members have heard. COVID punched us in the mouth like over and over and over again, and for me, as somebody who like works in direct programming, works with people all day, every day, or did. That was sort of my energy moments. Like that's what gave me life was people. These are my marching orders. And so COVID, right at the beginning of it, I had, I put a little bomb in my knee. I blew it up. I had my knee surgery, and then the world shut down. And for me, March is really, really tough every time, every year since 2019, because Ron was killed on March 28th, 2019. I turn a new year every year on March 20th. I'm very reflective, right? I'm always like, okay, let's break out the list. Like, what was good last year? Like, what did we do? What do we want to bring in? Like, what are these sort of moments we want to change up? How do we get to a healthier lifestyle? All this stuff. And so I always go through this huge reflection period and a celebration of like, last year was great. Like, you know, we got to do all this stuff. Like I became this closer to the version of myself that I want to be as an adult in this world. And then every year I get smacked, you know what I mean? Thinking about like, okay, well, we're going to go to the cemetery and we're going to go, you know, visit Ron, whose years are done.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, March every year absolutely sucks. And I get taken for an emotional loop. And COVID, you know, decided to come in March because that's just how it goes. Everything comes in March. And so I was, you know, at the beginning of 2020, I'm sitting on my couch. The world is shut down. You know, my job doesn't know what to do. We got to build new processes. I don't like sitting still. I'm a skateboarder still for life. You know what I mean? If I'm not at work, in the studio, somewhere, like I'm outside, you know? And I was forced to sit. And then I was forced to deal with the emotions of losing Ron in a way that I kind of held off to the side for, you know, a year. Like I had to be Hope, his mom's support system, because I was the person that exemplified Ron's life pre-heroin.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to support Hope. I had to support Ron Sr. So I never really got to deal with anything myself because this mom lost her son at the hands of another kid. A kid was killed by a kid, you know? And what that made me do in that COVID time was it forced me to deal with it big time. And so I started making those Ron paintings, which you saw in the studio, and that opened up this whole new world for me, visual language that I just wasn't using. You know, my partner who she pushes me. She's like, she's always trying to get me like, go do that, go do that. Like she's pushing me always. And she was like, you should get an iPad. Like you can't go down in the studio and paint. Like, you know what I mean? Like you should start just, I don't know, do it on this. Like it's COVID. We just got a stimulus check. Buy this. Do it. I was like, okay, let me take my stimmy and we'll go over it. And so what that did is I started excavating all these old Ron photos, right? We grew up as skate rats, so we had so much footage, so many photos of us just being, living life in Baltimore, in DC, in Howard County, like all the places that we went, San Francisco, everywhere. And so I started making all these Ron paintings, and I wasn't really worried about, you know, the actual like content, what I was making. It was just healing for me to be able to do this. Versus like before, you always think like, you know, sometimes you get in a mix where you're like, let me make sure I'm, you know, subscribing some sort of thing to this. And it's like, no, just let your hand go and paint. And what that did is I started thinking about this phrase, people and places you don't know how to know. And for me, people, Ron, it was just Ron's face. It was every relationship that was gone, every sort of fleeting moment, everything that you don't know that you could be invested in. I have a lot of like FOMO, big time, like on everything. And that's why I feel like I'm always like all over the place, because I feel like there's so many things I want to do on this earth that I won't have time to do. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about people, I'm like, what about all the homies that I don't even know, like I might be missing out, you know? I want more. I love people. And when I started thinking about places, when I started thinking about that phrase, I was like, okay, we just spent a year dealing with Ron. Like I did not want to. I held it over here for so long, but I did. It felt good, and it helped me a lot. I was like, let's go back a little. Let's go to another thing over here. And for me, you know, the Eassas came from Syria, Palestine, Lebanon in the 1910s and 1920s. But I grew up, after my Sito and Jito passed away, I grew up with a family that didn't celebrate it. So being Arab was confusing and tough and didn't know about it. And like, I don't know. And so I realized like, you know, I started making these paintings that were pulling together images of Ron and then these stereotypical symbols of the Middle East, because I had never been. Mm-hmm. The last thing I had was my Sito's cooking. And what that did for me in COVID, with this huge life shift that we had gone through, I realized like, okay, Sito's gone. Like, you can't get in the kitchen with her. Like, everything written in her hands is gone. You got to go. And so I wrote a long, heartfelt email to Seven Hills. There's a lot of organizations that are working with young people using skateboarding and art because it's just such an amazing connector. And that's what they talk about, is like skateboarding becomes that entry point to build relationships with people. And then you talk about leadership, you talk about art skills, you talk about professional development, all of these things. And in a lot of places where there is not a lot of hope, you know what I mean? In Amman, 70% of the population is under 30, and over half of that population is unemployed. And there's a severe lack of public space. For me, that would be disaster. That would not end well for me. And so I know for a lot of other people that also would not. And so I reached out to them to see if we could, build a residency with what I know and what I do with the museum currently in the prison system, as a skateboarder, as an artist. And so I got to spend 6 weeks in Amman, in a place that looked like a bunch of Eassa cousins. Like, everybody I was with, I was like, you look like my aunt, you look like my dad. And for the first time ever, I'm in a place where I'm Arab, and it's confusing as anything. Folks are coming up to me in machine gun Arabic, and I'm like, I'm sorry, like, Anazif, like, I only speak English. And that, like, feeling was so tough and weird, but it also was like, you are. Like, this is a thing that's a part of you. Your people are from here. Like, you should learn more about it. And spending the 6 weeks there, being immersed there, I'm working with young people every day, skateboarding, making art. We did like a 60 by 30 foot wall that was like led by the young people. I got to spend a week in Beirut building the country's first public skate park with a coalition of volunteers. All that stuff, like, when I talk a lot about right now feeling like a critical moment, like, I feel like my world has opened up in a way that I wasn't ready for. And then being able to take all of that, being able to have all that trust over the last year to build this work, has been pretty special, to say the least. What I found when I got home, and I was thinking about that phrase, people in places you don't know how to know. At this point, I did know now. I finally knew. It took me my whole entire life. It took me till I was 30 years old to know. And I only know a little bit.
Right.
And what was really interesting is when I was getting ready to make that work, I was thinking that, oh, this is going to be about all of my experience over there. It was like, no, it really made me realize it's about my nuclear family. You know what I mean? It's still, all those images up there is my 3 siblings, my mom, my dad, my Sito, and my Jito. And pulling those relationships together with some of the imagery of my pre-awakening times, my post-awakening times. It was like really necessary for me. And part of the reason why I was really glad that you were able to come to the studio before is like, that never would have happened without me going to the Ron paintings, without me like finally pulling that close to my body, because I think for a lot of us, anytime we go through something that is so traumatic, so terrible, like something you just can't deal with, you hold it here. I've noticed that throughout the Ron situation is like over half of our crew couldn't go to court when it happened because it was too much. You know what I mean? That sentencing, putting a face to why he's not here was too much. You got to leave it over here. But COVID really, for me, said, no, pull it in. Pull it up.
Yeah.
You'll be all right.
Yeah, I think you're probably like, and I know we're running, yeah. I was to say this and we take some questions. But I think one of the coolest things, actually seeing, from the studios and not seeing it in the space, is that the work it seems it's a full cycle of your identity, because I know your work before, and with a lot of like the genderless people, which is really like a full representation of just the community. And now with this work, this installation, what I found the most interesting was that there's this sand, which is really representative of back home, but then on the bottoms of each painting, it has these flowers and this grass, which is very representative of very much like Maryland. Maryland's a very green state, so it's kind of just like a very lovely juxtaposition of environments that really inform who you are.
Yeah.
So can we take some?
Any questions from our audience? Well, y'all keep talking.
Okay.
I was gonna say, no questions.
Dive in at the end.
So, sorry to hear about your friend. How would you describe any major shifts in how you expressed on painting after that versus before?
I think, if I was looking at my work, as I was prepping for this show, it was really interesting because I've got the work right before, the Ron paintings, which open up this work, and then everything that before it came here. And, some of the work that you reference, it almost felt like now that I'm in this moment, like it almost feels a little dishonest in the way that I wasn't bringing my full self into things. I wasn't allowing myself to really say it because at that time I couldn't, I had to keep it here or even further over there. And so what I found from the Ron paintings and allowing myself to just paint, I feel like the older we get and the more that time becomes precious, oftentimes you don't have that free blocks and periods of extended time to make, right? Sometimes things are for a purpose. Sometimes you have an idea and you want to put that on. And so giving myself the freedom to just let my hand move, trusting myself, knowing that, it's in you, you're fine, just let it go. It brought my paintings to a confidence level where I was like, oh, wow. And then what happened after when I was coming back is that confidence that happened subconsciously. As soon as I started really harnessing that and making those decisions consciously, it brought me to a place where I was able to make moves in my work that I never would have 3 years ago. I was able to let things just stand for what they are in a way that I didn't before. I know it sounds kind of crazy looking at that installation, but that is a very, what's the word? I used to work very overindulgently. I know that may seem overindulgent in there, but there's really 4 painting moves and 4 sculptural moves, right? And so I really wanted to go to a place where I was investing myself into those 8 moves very distinctly. And that's not something that was in my sort of vocabulary before. And I think what it took was for me to get to a more honest place of how I was feeling and how I was approaching that work to be able to actually do that part of it and some of those outcomes that came out.
Yes.
Want to go? So, talk a lot about skateboarding. I'm a skateboarder and artist. I was thinking about it recently, from a very young age, you're walking into these skate shops and you're learning art. You're learning from graphics what you want to choose, what you want to live with. And I think that's kind of like a gateway, right, to art. So for you, what's the connection in your mind and in your experience between skateboarding and art and where they kind of meet each other?
From the jump, it was Mark Gonzalez and seeing what was possible. You know what I mean? And obviously there was a reason why all of us were riding Deluxe or Crooked versus Darkstar, you know? So you get your ideas from that of what you think what you're excited about. And then for me, I ended up wanted to go to SFAI because my two best friends, who are a couple years older than me, moved out west. You know, they're living in Oakland, they're skating in Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, and I was like, I want to do that. I was visiting all the time, and I couldn't. I didn't have the money to go. So I went to MICA because I wasn't really interested in an academic sort of pursuit at that time. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, I'll commute to MICA, and I'll save up money, and then I'll go to SFAI next year. And then I got to MICA, and I had a few professors. I had Dominic Terlizzi, Joe Schmale, and Dan Dudrow, who flipped my world upside down. And Dominic was first. He, skateboarding adjacent, he grew up with Jake Rupp. And so he was like, oh, you're a lifer. You're one of the, like, let me help with some thoughts. Let me share with you some artists. And for me, that intro from him really made me think about like, oh, like I could take this energy that I have and put it somewhere that I'm actually excited about. Because at that time, I know Mike is an expensive stumble, but like I did get a little lucky there that I stumbled into exactly where I needed to be. I had no thought from the jump that that's where I should have been, but it was actually the perfect place for me to explore all those things.
I noticed the colors are really interesting. Hello.
Sorry, it's just really bright.
I'm sorry. Well, you put your head down.
You good? You good?
The colors you use, they have this like dreamlike capability with them. And the interesting thing about it is fairy tales are unreal things that are true. But when you're doing, I guess like identity art, that's the term that's just off the top of my head. You're turning something real, unreal to express some type of truth.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, how does that make you feel?
I think it's something I'm still figuring out. I think this body of work paired with that most recent experience has sort of like opened my world up in ways, like I said, that I didn't expect or couldn't have expected. So I think for me, it's solidifying some feelings about direction and what I want to do next.
And what are those feelings? Because you haven't said feelings yet.
Well, some of them I gotta hold, but I think, I don't know. I think it's still in the curiosity phase. Like I think for me, a lot of times I don't allow myself to feel the emotions until after I've solved the problem or the issue. Like when I talked about Ron and that first year, instead of being completely floored and really holding a lot of rage, which I feel like I do now, I spent that first year kind of like going into battle, like how do I support hope? And I think I realized more and more is like I hold things off until I'm ready to really feel them. And a lot of times when I'm ready to really feel them is when I've been able to figure them out a little bit better. So the feelings that I could associate now are excitement, a grounding in who I am and what I want to go learn more about. And I would say a gratitude to the folks at Seven Hills who really helped me see some things that I've been yearning to see about myself for a long time that I didn't know how to do it. And then the other things, I think they'll come. I think it's all of those things that I just mentioned make me question what's going on in my life right now and what's my life going to look like in a year, which I think is going to be very different from this moment. And I think that's the emotions I got. I don't know if that answers, it probably doesn't, but yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
what you said about engaging, using skateboarding to engage kind of youth that are kind of a little wayward. And in skateboarding, there's kind of a common theme that draws some people in, which is kind of a destructive element. You always hear skate and destroy, but like what, how could you see your work using like skate to create and like be more of an avenue of productivity and emphasize all the positive things and kind of downplay the.
For sure. I think it's changed a lot too. Like I feel like skateboarding is still like has so much work to do, but like I think we're starting to see the best version of skateboarding come up, whereas like, you know, you used to watch old Baker videos and it glorifies like spliffs in a 30 pack at any session. And that's like kids grow up seeing that and they like think that's how people live, and it's not. Whereas like now you see, you know, like it or not, with the rise of like the Olympics and skateboarding in the Olympics, a lot of skateboarders now see themselves as athletes and treat themselves as such. And there's now a lot of skateboarders who are pretty outspoken about being like sober, changing lifestyle. So I think that is really exciting. I think the movement of skateboarding no longer being such a boys club, even though it still is, I think we've got a lot of work to do on that. Which is interesting that in a place like Aman, in Skatistan, who works in Kabul in Afghanistan, and across the world, you see all these organizations who like are using skateboarding, and their participants are more of a 50-50 male-female ratio, where in the States it's still such a boys club. So I think we've got a lot to learn actually from people who came to skateboarding and all of the surrounding culture of it, who have come to that in maybe the last 10 to 15 years versus, you know, the California culture that created it. So I think being involved in things like that and some of the smaller ways through like maybe some DIY things happening in our own specific towns is a really healthy way to combat that sort of hecticness that we, you know, that it has. Because I think it's true. It's like you could go either way. All of my friends are either like thriving because they've taken all of that energy, which is, it's a lot of energy, and they put it into something that they truly care about that will sustain them for their life. And then I've lost a lot of friends on the other end too. And it's, for me, it's created my marching orders, and I hope that we can continue to make more for people.
Quick question, real quick.
Yeah.
I always wondered, why do skateboarders document everything?
It's just been I don't know. It's like, I mean, before cell phones, we were filming everything because that's what you did, right? Like
It's just like a thing?
you filmed, like you made a video with your friends. You hoped that maybe you were good enough to get, you know, on a shop, and then you hoped that maybe you would get, you know, regionally, and all of a sudden you wanted to live that lifestyle. When I was 15, the only thing I cared about was skateboarding.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Everybody has delusions of like, I'm going to be a pro skateboarder. It's like, probably not. But, you know, we emulated the people we looked up to. The artwork, we emulated the artwork that we saw,
Right.
you know what I mean, the culture bear is doing. And that's like how we became invested in all that. It's just been like, that's what happened. That's how it was like shared with the world. And so we were like, all right, we're going to share ours with the world.
You guys were like ahead of the curve of vlogging. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause it's the same sort of thing like where I'm from, the DMV area, like DC PG area. A lot of the I was basically my entire life was just like go-go music. I was a promoter for like bands and like stuff like that. And one of the things that was definitely inspiring was like they used to record everything. They would record their sessions. They would record handing out flyers, like everything. So I just always wondered like why you guys had to think, but. Cool.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you to you, Kayla.
Thank you, Caitlin, Marymount, Cody, and everybody who came in today.
Yeah.